Joe Weatherill, welcome to 730 South Australia.
Good to be with you, son.
What made it necessary to terminate Mike Rann's leadership?
Well, look, what I was interested in was reaching agreement about the transition to a new Labor leader. And that's what I've always said to anyone that I've been speaking to, and we've been able to achieve an agreement. And I think that's a good thing.
What was going on that made it necessary for Labor to change its leader?
Well, look, Mike has said that he was proposing to leave at some point, so the question of transition was something we had to grapple with. And what I always said is that that should be something that we should try and reach agreement about.
Was the government failing to connect with people?
Well, look, I certainly made some points at the last election when I ran for Deputy Premier about the fact that people thought we were a good government, but they didn't like the way we were governing. And so I certainly offered myself then, at that time, to try and address some of those issues. So I think there are some issues we need to address there.
We'll come back to those in a moment, but you said Mike Rann had made it clear that he was going. Were you aware that he'd made an arrangement to go in March?
No.
Not at all?
No.
That came as a complete surprise to you?
Well, look, I knew that Mike was talking about leaving at some point, and I'd certainly heard discussion about March, but I was not aware of any arrangement.
Or commitment for either from him to the party or the party to him?
No, that's right.
So back to this issue with engaging with the people. At the last election, there were a number of people who on that day, on that Saturday morning, thought that they might lose their seats. They were worried about it. It looked that bad. Were you in that boat?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I packed my office up. I certainly thought that we were unlikely to succeed, given the polling that seemed to be around. Yeah.
You packed your office up?
Yes, I did.
So how do you propose to turn that around?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, I think people did think that we'd done some good things and do believe that we're a competent government. So the fundamental economic settings are sound, and so it's important that there's continuity about those things. But I think people have been a bit concerned about the way in which we govern, and I've spoken about the idea of involving people in the decisions that affect their lives. I think people expect that, and I think the quality of decisions improve when you do that.
How will you do that? Because in your own electorate of Cheltenham, there would be a number of people who think that you actually failed miserably, to be blunt, over the racecourse.
Well, look, it doesn't mean reaching agreement with everybody. I mean, the idea of actually...
Does it mean telling people what you're going to do before you ram it down their throat?
Well, we didn't do that with Cheltenham. I mean, I went through a very long process of discussing with people what I thought ought to happen. And the idea of talking to people and trying to reach common ground doesn't mean abdicating the role of leadership and giving that to a group of people. About the Cheltenham racecourse, something that I've been intimately involved in, I arrived at the view that that racecourse was always going to be sold, whether under our government or under a future government. And the real question was whether it would be sold in a way that would give benefits for the community, or whether we'd just have wall-to-wall housing across the whole of the estate.
Now, you've said this is a change of leadership, not a change of government. How are you going to be different then?
Well, look, I think one of the things that I've consistently said is that I won't be just out there making announcements without talking to people. So it's a bit inconsistent with that for me to be sort of upending any decisions that I might have a perspective about. I've got a group of Cabinet colleagues, and I'll be consulting them about any changes I make. But and those are matters really for when I become Premier. We have a Premier and there is a process of transition, and I'm preparing myself for that role. So it's neither appropriate or timely for me to be making those sorts of remarks.
I'll plough on regardless. You've got a number of options in the Sustainable Budget Commission, none of them particularly palatable. But would you be of a mind to revisit some of the things that actually addressed politicians' entitlements, specifically numbers of ministers, logbooks for cars and cars themselves?
Look, I'm not addressing any of those specific policy issues now. I'll wait for my opportunity as Premier to make those sorts of decisions, and I'll be talking to my colleagues about them.
What about social policy? Will you take a different attitude to that?
Well, look, I don't know. It depends what issues you're talking about. But
right, well, how about the issue of Penny Wong? You welcomed her, the announcement of her baby that she's having with her partner this week. Would you like to have seen them being able to achieve that pregnancy in South Australia? Because under our IVF laws, they couldn't.
Yes, I mean, and these are usually matters of conscience, and it wouldn't be my intention to disturb the conscience rule in South Australia, which has had a long tradition. But my perspective is, as a Member of Parliament, yes, I would like to have seen that to be an easier proposition for them.
Would that be on your agenda as something to change? I mean, obviously not immediately, but would you bring that forward? Because it would be difficult for some in your party, wouldn't it?
I mean, these are traditionally dealt with by private members, but the question of these conscience issues and legislation on social policy issues. But certainly I'd support measures in those areas.
Do you intend marking yourself out as a bit of a social reformer?
No, I am what I am. I have certain views about these questions, and if I'm asked about them, I'm more than happy to tell people what I believe, but they're not front and centre in my considerations.
You believe in them, but you won't fight for them?
No, I'll deal with these issues as they arise. I haven't really considered what's first. I haven't considered what's first on the government's agenda or in some of these areas that touch on private members' business. So I haven't really organised the order of any program that I'd propose to promote to the people of South Australia.
Speaking of families, you have a young family.
Yes.
Do you intend to travel as much as Premier?
Look, I don't really know how much might travel. I gather it was quite a bit. And so that will be a consideration for me. Obviously, I don't like being away from the girls.
Will you travel less than Mike ran, is the blunt way of...
Well, look, I'm not... I presume so, but because of those circumstances, but I haven't really directed my mind to those matters. It really depends, I suppose, what the demands are and whether it is possible for them to travel with me, and that might be difficult. I haven't really directed my mind to that.
The Premier doesn't always have to travel, though, does he? There are plenty of things that others can do.
Sure, but there might be also some important... I know the Premier does have to travel regularly, whether it's interstate or overseas, and many of the visits are vital. So that is something that I'm going to have to grapple with, yes.
The final question about children and families. There have been calls already, despite you not having achieved the premiership quite yet, for you to be challenged if you ever dance in public and dance in front of children again.
Yes, I think that's probably fair enough.
You can make that commitment, can you?
Yeah, I think I'm prepared to. Well, I must say I was very reluctant. I knew that it was going to be the debacle that it was, and I wasn't disappointed. Yes.
Is it any comfort to you that you were better than John Rao?
Well, all I can say is that that's a very low bar to have to leap.
Jay Weatherill, thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you, Simon.